And good evening, everyone. Welcome to another OSR tabletop with myself, DM Bloodworth. I'm calling myself DM Bloodworth today because this is a talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And as you're probably very much aware, it's been about a week and a half before we started seeing some videos coming from Gary Con and some of the announcements that were made at Gary Con has plenty of people on both sides of this debate. And the debate that we're going to be addressing is, and I'm just going to switch views here. The debate that we're going to be addressing is that Luke Gygax and Dan Ayub Dan Ayub is is the D&D, almost like a vice president of Dungeons and Dragons. So he is the lead person of Dungeons and Dragons as an IP, and obviously works for Wizards of the Coast and a subdivision of Hasbro. And he and Luke Gygax, according to their own story, they met back in August. And they basically wanted to, bring Luke Gygax and the Gygax name into back into Dungeons and Dragons to mend a rift that has existed, for many decades at this point, but more so these last few years. All of us that have been around and been in this hobby, and whether we were playing 5th edition or playing another edition of Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons, or like myself still playing the older editions, we were all very much aware of the animosity and vitriol that Wizards of the Coast was lobbing towards, Gary Gygax and the other, creators from back in the TSR era. And they, from ignoring their contributions to the hobby to outright making statements, very public statements, from their executives or their directors of content for Dungeons and Dragons, their spokespersons on interviews and whatnot. It was just a steady stream of attack upon attack upon attack on both Gary Gygax and, like I said, others, in that creative field back in the early days of TSR. And, for the most part, all others were just simply ignored. And they created an environment where new people coming into the hobby would be attuned to this constant message of we're better than what those people were back in the day, where we've taken the game to new popularity, which may be true, but we've also done it on a moral ground as well, that we're better people, morally speaking, than the creators 50 years ago. And this has been constant. It's been both by omission, by taking names from the front of the book, where there would normally be acknowledgments, to pushing them all the way into the back of the book or on the back cover of the book. There were instances where they would remove an artist's name from the poster for the movies, so a very iconic, well-known painting, and then the name is removed from the painting, so that no acknowledgement had to be given there. Even they had a promo poster that was that was showing piezo creatures, the piezo depiction of creatures rather than Dungeons and Dragons. And it just goes to show you how little respect Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro were directing towards those original creators, and for many of us, for us in that time frame too, right? And I will show the disclaimer that really does spark a lot of this, and the fact that the disclaimer is still there um, tells me that whatever mending they're going to claim exists, for us, the consumer, for many of us, the consumer, um, that mending has not taken place. I'm going to jump over here to the chat and welcome people in here. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? If anyone wants to join this chat, you are certainly welcome to do so. I am going to put out that invitation now. And I know, Kevin, if you wish to, I know you've been having a discussion on Twitter over this issue as well. So, yeah, you are absolutely welcome to jump in and let me get that invite out there right now. So, and there it is. Hey, Foxoff, how's it going? I think it's a joke, and I saw a couple of people trying to shill it because they know Luke, and that is it. They removed themselves from D&D to the current day slop. All right, yeah, and I do know others that are, I do know some of the other creatives, and Luke Gygax mentioned them, right? So Ann Meyer and Jay Scott. Jay Scott is a fellow YouTuber out there who has been showcasing Greyhawk for years now, and he's definitely an old school person out there, and that his involvement in it, more so than Luke Gygax, but his involvement with the project moves me, more on the fence than his absence would. If he wasn't involved with it, that certainly wouldn't have moved me there. So let me let Kevin come on in. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? I'm just waiting. Kevin, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. All right. Now I can hear you now, loud and clear too. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
Channel. I think this is the first time I've had you on the channel. So thank you, for stopping in. I know I was looking at some of your comments on Twitter and everything, and I put it out there. I want voices on both sides of this, to come on here and and pull me onto one side of the fence or the other. You know what I'm saying? So I want to be really open, and I want to hear both the pros and cons. I've already kind of stated my case, but let me give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and then what your take is on this as well.
Absolutely. No. Like DM Bloodworth said, Kevin Lamb, you can find me on X, mostly chatting about D&D or some aspect of the hobby there. I don't know that I actually have a side on this. I'm in the wait and see, just like everyone. I'm asking questions on X. That does not mean that I am completely accepting everything that's being stated by Dan Ayub or WotC or any of that. I know that I like Luke. I like Jeff Easley. I like Ed Greenwood and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. So I feel like we're at a point where if there was ever an opportunity for WotC to mend fences, it's literally now or never. Because if they bring all these like legacy creators in and then still screw them or ostracize the fans or do all their normal stuff, that's it for them. At least as far as people like you and me ever caring. And so I want Luke to have a good experience with this. I want him to feel like his dad is being honored, and whatever history, he had or he can share. I would love there to be a best case scenario where Dan just says, okay, we're going to let you do what you think is right, and we're going to trust you. But I'm like you. The disclaimers need to come down, and some sort of statement. I feel like some sort of statement in advance of the Greyhawk book needs to come out from WotC, or people are just nobody's gonna buy it that first week because nobody's gonna know if it's good or not, and so people are gonna wait for reviews, and it's probably not gonna do that well. So I hope they're listening, and that they really do want to make a course correction here. I don't know if you saw my latest post on X where I kind of addressed it to Dan. I had a pretty big list of things that they need to do, and that I see they're going to need to do to get anyone to take them seriously. And I don't know how much of that you want me to get into.
You have the floor. So if you want to some of the main ones that maybe I haven't mentioned already, I think the disclaimer coming down is really the first one. I don't.
And they could do that right now. So that would be so easy for them.
Yeah. It would probably take them, like, if you think like every one of those, and if people aren't aware of what disclaimer I'm talking about, or we're talking about, if you go on to DriveThruRPG and you go to Wizards of the Coast, and then you go to any of the Dungeons and Dragons, tabs, from whether it's first edition or old, OD&D first edition, second edition, third, probably fourth as well, even though that's their own. But anything pre Wizards of the Coast 5e has this disclaimer on there, and I'm going to actually bring that up and and show that off to everyone. So let me do this so everyone knows. Let's see if no performance warning. Add a share screen. Yes. My device can handle it. Let's see. So this is the disclaimer as it appears on the Keep on the Borderlands. All right. So the most well-known adventure module probably ever created. All right. And so I think
they said it was the best selling of all time because it was packaged and repackaged so many times for so many years.
But it's probably personally, it's the one I've run the most, because it is just it's just a huge, it's a huge sell. So anyway, it's so easy to introduce new players to not just Dungeons and Dragons, but to a hobby, the tabletop role-playing hobby. It's a great adventure. So anyway, let me just read this real quick and hope you don't mind my going through this. So we, Wizards, recognize that some of the legacy content available on this website does not reflect the values of the Dungeons and Dragons franchise today. Some older content may reflect ethnic, racial, and gender prejudice that were commonplace in American society at the time. These depictions were wrong then and are wrong today. This content is presented as it was originally created because to do otherwise would be the same as claiming these prejudices never existed. Dungeons and Dragons teaches that diversity is a strength, and we strive to make our D&D products as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This part of our work will never end. My problem with this has always been that this isn't recognizing something. This is making a declaration. All right. And to say we're recognizing something is taking the onus off of themselves to actually prove it existed, and they can't, and they know that they can't, and so and this is not just attacking the creatives, because it is so blanket statement across. You can't say, well, this individual or that individual. You have to lump everybody into, this same basket here, kind of like the basket of deplorables kind of mentality that they have here. And
almost like if you were even just alive at that time, you were part of it.
It's like if you happen to glance at it on the bookshelf, you are now tainted, as a supporter of all of their allegations. And so to me, it was like, and then it was compounded by interviews by Jason Tondro, who was brimming, just getting ready to throw out there how this would never have been a product made today, and how they're so much better morally, so much better than those older people back in the day, the people that literally created the hobby that's putting food on his table. What I'm saying? It's just the ingratitude and the hypocrisy, of their actions over these last, 5 or slightly more years is just incredible to me. And so to me, I really can't come off that fence. All right. I'm more likely to fall on the other side of saying I'm not even at the wait and see kind of thing, if this is still up there. All right.
Right.
There's no way, because I would have to give up a principled stance in order to purchase this, as long as this is still there. All right. And I'll stop sharing, so we get rid of that. So what's your take there on that point?
I totally hear you. And speaking of the principle, I tell you, when I first saw the Kyle Brink, the infamous Kyle Brink interview, I literally, it might have been immediately after watching that video, I went downstairs and gathered up all I had of 5e, because I had some local buddies that were running a 5e game. And so that was at the time where you could buy like the box, the little slipcase that had all 3 core books. And it was on Amazon, and it was like 50% off or something. So I was like, okay, I got the 5e books. I'll go play with my buddies, my local buddies here. And after the Kyle Brink thing, I literally went down, I grabbed those. I just drove them to the local used bookstore, and I was just like, here, they gave me, whatever pennies on the dollar for them. I needed them out of my house. And I was like, I'm so done with this. I don't even want them physically near me. That's how repulsed I was by their entire company. And now, just to give a little disclaimer on could I ever buy like the new Greyhawk book or anything like that? It has come out that that the rules in that book are going to be 5.5e, and I will never play that game. I will never buy the rule book, the core rules ever. I play AD&D, and that's all I'm gonna play. I'm never gonna buy these to use them in that way.
Right.
The question for me is, okay, if it's chock full of kick-ass interior art, like the cover, they got Jeff Easley. If the inside looks cool and there's all these, there's a bunch of neat lore tidbits or whatever. Could I own it as a coffee table book, or could I own it as a, to support Luke, or maybe say, hey, you guys are going in the right direction. Let's put my money where my mouth is. That's my question. I am never going to use it as an actual for those mechanics. I just won't. I won't. Not even 2014 D&D, or there's no version of WotC D&D that I'm going to play. Now, again, if I'm in an local AD&D group right now. It's actually run by Vic Dorso, who does Dave Kong.
Oh, I know Vic. I know Vic very well. Yes.
And so that's all even that I play locally. If the old group calls me up and they're like, "Hey, you want to do some 5e thing?" I mean, I might still show up just because it's fun. I'm not bringing my own books though.
Yeah.
So that's the only part of my wait
Right.
and see. And yes, if the disclaimers are there, or honestly, if I open that, I'm certainly not going to buy it sight unseen or pre-order it.
Right. Yeah.
But if I go to a store and I can flip through it, I tell you, if I see Jason Tondro's name on that first page, I might just put it right back.
Yeah, I can't do it.
No matter what I hear.
I wouldn't do it. I would not do it if his name is in there. Not touching it. If it's like we shouldn't be more defensive of Gary Gygax than his own family. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like, and I don't really fault them for wanting to get attached again to Dungeons and Dragons, but there should be some guardrails, set up and say, well, wait a second, or some lines that be like, oh, well, we're not going to cross over this line unless this is done, and Jason Tondro being at all involved with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a non-starter if he gets any credit in it.
On Gary in the history of, Dungeons and Dragons, the 50th anniversary history of Dungeons. I mean, that's to me, just like, how could you possibly do it?
Yeah. And then his, his online
his interview afterwards.
We're not worth listening to. I didn't even care about their outrage and da-da-da-da. Yeah.
It's just unbelievable to me.
I'd actually forgotten about the scrubbing Jeff Easley's name from the D&D poster until you had mentioned that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that he did the cover for the Greyhawk book. So something, and I know he wasn't happy about that. He
mentioned it too. He was like, wait a second here.
Right.
It's like, there's an implied, even though they may own the image, they may own that, but they don't own the image to the point that they can remove the signature of the artist from the image.
And why would you want to? Why would you not want Easley's name? Everybody, that is such an iconic signature in person.
They have a loathing for the legacy of Dungeons and Dragons. They literally loathe those individuals. The only reason, and somebody mentioned this, maybe in that thread on your X, I don't know if you were responding to somebody, but somebody else put in there. There's a reason this is happening. All right, and the reason this may be happening is that 24 D&D sold nothing. And when I say nothing, like below 10,000, it sold nothing.
Yeah, forget the fastest selling edition of all time. It never showed up on any Amazon best-selling list.
In the first minute, it might have been fastest selling. They make no qualifiers on what that actually means. And I know it was alleged that when you purchased it on the D&D website, D&D Beyond, and you purchased the physical copy along with the PDF, they counted that as 2 sales. All right, so it's because you could buy them separately. So when you bought them bundled, they count that as 2 sales rather than 1. And so that was another thing that was again alleged. But since they don't release their numbers, if their numbers were phenomenal, let's say they sold 150,000 copies, of each of those rule books, they'd be out there showing it in their revenue reports and everything like that. They'd be blowing their own horns over it. The fact that they don't and they still obscure it, they still try to mold it in with the rest of their, electronics and MTG and all of those other things, then it goes to show you that it did not do well at all. And so now the other argument that I saw that again puts me and you kind of mentioned it too, this is a first step. if the sales tank, and nobody picks it up, then they'll be like, oh, well, we're just not going to pursue this any
Right.
further. And so there are some saying, well, if we all back this thing and we show, maybe they'll be like, oh, okay, we're going to create even more for this. And I'm not anywhere near that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I want this, if it's going to be anything, I want this to be true Greyhawk. If I'm going to see that they're going to have the races that you find in, the races that you find in 5e, if they're going to have, if they're going to use species instead of races, I mean, that I don't care about. But, if they're going to make it 5.5 completely, and I have a point about that too. I'm not in on it, because I don't have the rule set. I like you, I gave my everything of my 5e stuff, and I only had 4 books of 5e. I gave it all to my niece. All right.
Yep.
And she was so excited because she was like, oh, I'm the first person in my college that is going to have the physical books, because all they did there, they never bought the stuff. All right. You know what I'm saying? They never bought anything. They had one person might have bought the books. They broke it down and they Xeroxed it and sent it out to everybody, on her college campus. And she was at a computer arts campus. She went to a university for that. She is she's a producer of anime
Awesome.
now down in Atlanta. Then that's her profession. So she's really excited about, Dungeons and Dragons. 5e is what she came into, and she didn't own the books until I gave them to her. That's why we're saying, like, it's us old guys, and gals too. But it's the older generation that are buying this stuff. We actually buy stuff. And when they told us to, oh, there's no more room for you, in this hobby, they basically just told their meal ticket goodbye too, and that's something that just, to me, it's just it's a line that you cross, and it's hard to come back over that line again. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what's some of the other things that you had on your list that also needs to be done?
Oh, it's get rid of every stupid thing that they injected into the game since 2019 or 2018.
Everything from Tasha's on is garbage.
Yeah, the X cards, the safety tools, all the stupid artwork, making the monsters cute, and having all the proms and bakeries and cooking food festival things. All of that, just get it out of the game. Yeah. And even if I don't own the games, I want it to be respectable. I want, the thing that bears the name, at least in part of the hobby that I still play. I don't want it to be a laughing stock.
Right.
And, it's like, even if I'm not going to drink Bud Light, I'd rather that they have ads with like the Clydesdales and the hot girls than, whatever other stupid crack.
Right.
So it's like, all right, at least make it respectable. And maybe they can also do some things kind of like they did when they kicked off 5e, where they were doing those like premium reprints of the, AD&D books. And like the box set of OD&D, maybe they could lean into that and keep some of those evergreen, and have, maybe, I don't know, I was theorizing maybe updating the covers, like have Jeff Easley do new covers, kind of like how he would do new covers for like the Player's Handbook from first edition, second edition, the 1989, and then the 1995, something to give us collectors or somebody who just wants a new book, that we could, grab onto or have fun with or something.
Yeah.
I don't, literally a lot of my posts on X were, I'm trying to figure out what I would do. And so it's like, all right, let's start a little bit of a discussion. Let's be open and just see what what, if Dan Ayub and the new regime is listening, what do we want to tell them? And do we want them to try? Do we want them to cater to us? And if they're willing to cater to us and dial back everything that they did, why wouldn't we consider that?
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And, one of the things I was thinking, and I know a lot of people have been, saying the same thing, that they think that probably within a couple of years, maybe by 2028, there'll be talks about a 6th edition. All right. And if these people are brought on, all the people we've already mentioned are brought onto it, and they're going to become the design team for 6th edition, then I know some of the things that Luke mentioned during that during that panel that he was with Dan Ayub. He was saying, basically 5e, he called it a newfangled thing. And he said, basically 5e is too easy. All right. And that's not his gaming. That was never his father's gaming style. And it's just too easy. And he says, I don't know about, putting out a rule book that is going to, perpetuate that ease of play. He wants to make it a little bit grittier. He wants to make it more like that. So if he becomes let's say the head of the design lead for 6th edition, then I would recommend, just to create that separation, I would recommend calling it AD&D 3rd edition instead of 6th edition, because now that's a real throwback to saying, well, this is going to be a grittier, more advanced version of D&D, and you can still play your 2024 D&D. They're calling it 5.5 now, so they finally kind of buckled, under the reality that it's not truly 5th edition anymore, that it is someplace in between. But yeah, I think AD&D 3rd edition would actually be something that that might bring some of us over to it. But again, not so long as the disclaimer is still up there. I mean, that to me is just can't be there.
And I totally agree with your take on that. I get a little nervous at the idea of them using AD&D, because right now I feel like AD&D is untainted as a term. You say AD&D and at least, okay, that's the all good version of Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Where it's like the people that play Birthright, it's like they're like, totally untainted. I've just got TSR or Al Qadim. It's like there's been no 5e Spelljammer or Dragonlance makeover for those systems. So yes, if they want to do 3rd edition AD&D and they did it right, sure. I think a lot of people kind of consider Castles and Crusades to almost be AD&D 3rd edition, or
it's like 2.75 or something
like that.
Yeah,
but I was thinking about Castles and Crusades because that is a modern system that does have a pretty good following of old school AD. So it's like, what could WotC's version of that be? Of course, Troll Lord Games is like, shut up, we don't want there to be a WotC version of that.
Right.
But that, and I don't think they will do that, but some of the stuff that Luke has said and that other people have said that have had other private conversations with Dan, it almost sounds like there could be something along those lines.
Well, I know Luke is still working with Troll Lords to release some of the things that his father had worked on back when he was with Troll Lords, and in consultation with Troll Lords and writing with Troll Lords, Gary, the father, when he was with them, and some of the things that weren't part of TSR, that weren't transferred over to Wizards of the Coast, that were really under his, I guess his stepmom's, under that estate there, and that's slowly being released through Troll Lord Games. So I'm currently waiting on the Kickstarter fulfillment on the Worlds of Gary Gygax, with all of his world building books and all of that kind of stuff coming out. And they're still going to continue releasing things through Troll Lord games going forward. I know Luke was talking about, well, the Gord novel series is going to get, republished
Oh,
um,
nice.
through Troll Lords. All right,
Okay,
and
cool.
it's going to have audio as well. So when you're getting it on Amazon, you can get it for audio versions of it as well, which is awesome. For
Yeah.
that. So it seems that they're kind of. I hope that this supposed deal with Wizards of the Coast is not going to interfere with
Right.
that over there. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of conjecture on it. There's a lot of people that are going to wait and see. If I had to gauge my expectations, I don't have high expectations that Wizards of the Coast is going to do something that is truly a positive step forward.
Mhm.
I don't think that they have it in them. I
Yeah.
think that they're I think that they have too many people in their in their operation there, in the executive positions there that are ideologues, and they're just not going to they're not going to go forward with it. So I'm checking some of the mentions here as well. So let's see. Be honest. 5e is a return in many aspects, like uncrunching skills and keeping feats leaner. Um, um, 5e did adopt several things. Like, first of all, 5e is not a game system that innovated a whole lot. It
No.
it was very much like it borrowed from other systems. Like when people are like, oh, like they'll swear up and down that roll with advantage came from 5e. I was like,
Mhm.
no. Was it Into the Odd was the first one to I think Jonathan Tweet, Into the Odd was the first one that brought that in. Their inspiration system came from James Bond 007 Victory Games was the first RPG out there that had a system using hero points, which is basically the inspiration system that it would become. That I don't know which edition it was that had ascending armor class. I know it was still optional for AD&D second edition. And that might have been where it started, was AD&D second edition. But other game systems like Castles and Crusades basically has an uh, ascending armor class. So that was 2003 when they were developing it. It was released in 2004. So yeah, a lot of things that
And
Wizards
what
of
was
the
it?
Coast claimed.
Mecton and Cyberpunk were doing the stat plus your skill plus a
Yes,
die
yes,
roll. That was back
yeah,
in mid '80s.
yeah,
All
yeah.
that.
So there's a lot of game systems that did a lot of these things, and 5e just took the ones that they kind of liked, and and that's why Mike Merle's considered it like this is a very modular game system. You can take all these pieces and put them
Yeah.
in. You can take them out. You can do a number of things. Um, Star Wars got four force points. That is the base for inspiration. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm pretty sure that Victory Games 007 was before that. Before that that thing there. If you look at the hero points there, and you can, based on the quality of your rolls, you would gain these hero points, and then you can spend them to re-roll or make a critical success or that kind of thing. But anyway, let's see what else we have in here. So, like I said, I respect a lot of the people that are working on Luke Gygax's team. Some have come out and said, hey, just trust that we're not going to let them shit over this. All right. And, we're not going to let something go out there, that we're not going to be proud of. the other thing that like Luke kind of said was like during the panel, um, they were working on this now for a while. Before he had that conversation, this was something that he was going to release as an unofficial. Remember that? Like, I don't know if you watched that.
Yeah.
He said, well, so
I did
they
see
might
that.
have done most of this writing already. And so
now they're just injecting 5.5e into it.
Yeah, is that what they're going to have to do? Or maybe they'll push back on some of that too and say, well, no, we're not going to put that in there. Like, I mean, Greyhawk should not have tieflings and, and the other things that came out of, that were in the Forgotten Realms even, or, shouldn't have Warforged or, any of the other
Dragonborn,
Dragonborn or anything that came afterwards. It should be strictly, this is what Greyhawk was, and getting back to your earlier point where you said, like, they should just, because they own the IPs for all of the previous editions, and just do new layouts, do new printing, and put them out as a. And I know why they won't do that, because they would outsell their current.
D&D. It's
and they don't want to compete with themselves. They're petrified to compete with themselves because they know their current D&D will lose out to the other. And again, the ideology gets in the way of, well, we're a corporation, we're looking to make the most money, but not at the point where it's like what we're producing now is being outsold by a number of fold times more by the stuff that was created 40 years ago, because it would.
It reminds me of last year when they re-released Revenge of the Sith for its 20th anniversary. Right. And this is a Star Wars prequel. Yes. And it still was like the #2 movie in the country because Sinners was like, I think it just come out the week before. And so that was #1. And it was like gaining in profits every day. And after 5 days, they pulled it. It was like, I can almost see like Kathleen Kennedy being like, no, okay, abort, bad idea. This is making us like, because we just spent 5 years saying there's like Star Wars fatigue and we released too many movies, and that's why it's like, no, your movie sucked and trashed it. So I could see that. When Luke said he's going to add rules that are going to make it more Gygaxian, I wondered if he would. Now, I don't own Shadow Dark, but I kind of followed a lot of the reviews when it first came out, and I saw that that Kelsey put these like different tiers of difficulty. It's like Grindhouse mode or this, where it's like death at 0 hit points. Or this, I can't remember what they were, but it was like different levels of play.
At 0 hit points, you start bleeding out.
Into the Greyhawk, like, okay, it's 5.5e, but if you want to play Gygax mode, there's no death saves, and there's no tieflings, and there's no this, that, and the other thing. So I don't know.
That's a lot of additional pages to write, to specifically say as an optional rule you can omit this, omit that. It's a lot less writing to just say you don't include it at all. Like they shouldn't have death saves. You're right. They shouldn't have short rests. They shouldn't have the things that are unfortunately. Like the greatest examples of what 5e is, those are the training wheels, on 5e that, Luke is basically saying this game is too easy. That's what makes the game too easy. There's too much in there. There's too much of a power curve, like power bloat, I should say. There's too much of a power bloat in that game system as well, and then they created a culture around it where, new players don't even want to start with a first level character. They want to, I want to start at 5 because at 5, that's the equivalent of AD&D's 9th level, in a power relationship, and then when you look at things like D&D Beyond, I don't know if you've ever tried to create an adventure with D&D Beyond,
No.
but I tried just to test it out. And so I put 5 first level characters as, and I was like, all right, so let me start creating the challenges, and they're using their challenge rating. And if it goes like bright red, it means like it's like a death, it's like a, almost guaranteed total party kill. Right. So I put, 5 first level characters. And I think once I got to a 4th goblin and then a goblin lieutenant, all right, the thing went bright red. It was like too much of a challenge. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, there's no way that a first level party of 5, well-balanced character classes shouldn't be able to, if they're smart, take out the lieutenant first, and they should have a morale check once you do that, so you might not even have to fight the other 4 goblins. But I don't think that is in their calculation of when they're doing those challenge ratings. And to me, as an AD&D person, yourself probably included, challenge rating, what the hell is that? It's like,
exactly.
It's like,
if you roll Wandering Monster and 3 blue dragons come down from the sky because it's 1d4, then you hide.
It's like,
or you give them all of your gold.
You run, you hide, or you just you try to negotiate yourself out.
Right, exactly.
Or you're like the mouse at the bald eagle. If you've ever seen that image where the mouse is just like this to the bald eagle, because it's like, all right, I might as well, F you and I'm gone. But exactly, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like that cultural insertion that they created, like having challenge ratings in there, instead of just saying, no, you have to be smart. And you have to know when to fight, when to flee, and when to try to negotiate, or when to surrender, whatever, there is. And it removes all of those options. And it basically either means that you're going to fight and die, or you're not going to be challenged at all. And there's no in between in that. And that's just
both are unacceptable to a certain type of player that they're catering to and even encouraging. No, even Luke himself in the recent interview, and just to be like, fully honest here, I met Luke at GaryCon, and honestly, for the brief interaction, you'd almost think that he had made GaryCon just for me. The guy is so just nice and welcoming. And I've had such awesome experiences there, and I'm like, that's all him. And he has said, like, in that interview, he was like, okay, as far as like my, contributions to the game, I mean, he'll be the first to tell you he was just a glorified playtester back in the early days. And so, he's just come across as just genuine and humble, and like he really does want everybody to just enjoy the game. But he did have the one comment where he was telling a story, and he was like, D&D is about creating these great memories. And there was this one session where my buddy had this character, and he did, in one attack, he did over 300 points of damage. It was so epic. He rolled the critical and this and blah, blah. And I was like, what? That's like Waldorf the Mage from early, like Dragon Magazine, where people write in, like a guy writes in, he's like, my magic user created a nuclear bomb spell, and I just destroyed the world.
It sounded like he was describing 5e, because you could do that in 5e. I don't know how you do that in AD&D first edition.
Oh no, it 100% was 5e. 100% was 5e.
It had to be.
But he was saying it with such warm memories, such glee, that I'm like, all right, that's like not what we want, right? I mean, it's great that you had fun, but so I don't know. I'm wait and see. I like the guy. I like Jeff. I like the other people. That I don't want his thing to tank, and then we don't maybe see what somebody else.
Yeah, that's my one concern. Like if it does tank, and then they'll be like, all right, well, we're just going to, we're not going to move forward with anything new. We're not going to, we're not going to move away from some of those things that we don't like about, their practices and whatnot. And we're just going to let the thing die on the vine. kind of thing, which, I mean, some people out there have said the same thing. I'd rather it just die on the vine.
Sure.
Maybe 10, 15 years, they'll dust it off the shelf and they'll be like, all right, now we're ready to make a new edition that's going to cater to, a different, group of people. Like 15 years from now, I'm probably not going to be still doing this or whatever. I'll be like 75 by then.
Right.
So not sure,
But honestly, Richard, if it does die on the vine, you and I are going to be just fine.
I got plenty behind me.
Even if it's a success, I'm not switching systems.
Right.
But and I get the people who say, no, I'm not even giving you any benefit of the doubt. You need to do 100% of everything that you need to change.
Right.
And because, and there was just a recent quote that I feel like is relevant this week from Ryan Gosling about, because like the success of Project Hail Mary. And I think somebody must have been interviewing him or something. And they're like, what do you think about, people like not supporting the movie industry and theaters, and the whole industry is going to go belly up. And he just said, it's not moviegoers' job to save the film industry. It's our job to make entertainment worth coming out for.
Right.
And that's where WotC is right now. It's not our job to just take everything on blind faith and be like Charlie Brown with the football for the 50th time. They need to earn it. And if they're willing, I'm willing to observe and be like, hey, this, I'll support it on this level because it allows us to get this. But if people don't, hey, and not enough people do support them, and the whole thing dies, at the end of the day, they brought it on themselves. But it's, hey, it's a new thing to discuss and theorize about and contemplate. So why not?
Yeah, I think that in the short term, because they've heard all of these arguments. All right, they've had to. They've heard, people saying I'm still on the fence. I'm not going to come over to this thing. So I think that they're going to have to come out with a statement pre Gen Con, because I know they said that they're going to make more announcements in Gen Con.
Right.
If they're going to want this thing to have any legs whatsoever, I think that they're going to have to come out and go a little bit further and to actually put out a statement of exactly what did they apologize for. You know what I'm saying? Apologizing for missteps. All right.
No.
What a bullshit word that is.
Right. Or we apologize if some people took offense to. No. Hold your sword.
I want specific. I mean, they don't have to throw their employees, although some of them are former employees anyway. But all they have to say is, this statement is not something that is acceptable. And it should have never been said. It was wrong then. It's wrong now. Use that same terminology, right? Telling people that, if you look like me, you can't get out of the hobby fast enough. They should come straight out and say, without mentioning Kyle Brink's name, it was wrong then. It's wrong now. That was never something that we authorized. And that's it.
And it just accentuates the audacity of that disclaimer that you showed at the very beginning. That they would dare accuse early D&D of being racist when never in a million years did anyone from TSR D&D say people like that look like such and such can't leave the hobby fast enough.
No, it's just
no
insane.
version of that. Or that, these evil monsters are kind of like this minority group.
I know.
Or, we were never remotely. And I know people love to be like, oh yeah, but Gary had this one thing where he said in this letter that I don't care if girls don't play or blah, 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 blah. And he was clearly just venting and being bombastic. And he has many, many other statements where he welcomes women, and Kelsey
Yeah.
Dion can tell you how much he encouraged her to be a DM,
Yeah.
and all that stuff, which is why we have Shadow Dark, because of Gary welcoming females.
Right.
And there's been no version where, but Kyle Brink said in these other 10 interviews, he loves that, you know, they have an 80% white fandom, or no, that's all he ever said. He never dialed it back. No one in the company ever dialed it back. Tondro kind of ran with it even more. White dudes from Minnesota and Lake Geneva and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Never mind that the term fighting man goes back hundreds of years. It's just what those, you know, bigots in the Midwest, you know, just came up with. It's just so stupid. I agree. And that's kind of why I'm doing that. Like, I almost feel like just reading Dan Ayub at those interviews at Gary Con, watching the videos, I almost was getting a sense that he was feeling like, hey, I've done what I needed here. And I've got Luke that is given his blessing. And it's like, no. There's a lot more people. You should call up Rob Kuntz. He actually was writing the books that Tondro was smearing, or you know, some of them. And it offer him an apology. You need to acknowledge all the fans. There needs to be more. And I'm almost like, I don't know if he's getting it. So let me post about it. And, you know, it's up to him, obviously, if he wants to take any of it to heart. I don't even know, how much he's on social media. But I thought, let's ride a little bit of this momentum if Luke and company are on board, and see what happens.
I don't foresee them, reaching out to anybody else. I think that they got their Gygax name. They have Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss signed on. They have Jeff Easley doing the cover art for it. They have, I think they have the people that that they're comfortable with, even though it's kind of surprising, like, Hickman and Weiss, after their lawsuits and everything, that kind of surprises me too. But Wizards of the Coast doesn't completely own Dragonlance, and that's, possibly the reason why they have a lot more free latitude, to what they actually put out. They'll actually tell them, no, we're not doing that, whereas, if Luke comes over with Greyhawk is completely owned by Wizards of the Coast. The name, the setting, the whole 9 yards of it. And so he's not going to have that leverage to push back on it unless they so value having his name on it, thinking that we're going to just be, oh, okay, and just buy it, blindly, like, as nice as Luke Gygax is, I respect him for, both his military service. I as a veteran, of the same era, I joined in 1990, just like him. I was just 23 years old. He was 18. I respect, him as a person. I know that he loves the game. I know that he, loves the memory of his father, but there's just, that's how little I trust Wizards of the Coast, is that even with that, that's not enough to put me over the, onto that side of the fence and say, all right, I'm gonna lay my money down on this thing and take a chance. It'd have to be something where I say, all right, that's, and it's still a tough thing for me to be like, I'm going to give money to WotC.
Oh gosh,
it's just so tough to do it. And I
don't have any illusions about probably anybody there ever actually, in their heart of hearts, liking people like you or me. Maybe I just want, and I had said this in a post on X, they need to at least take the Tom Cruise approach or the Michael Jordan approach, where it's like, you know what, me and Tom Cruise couldn't be more opposite in what we believe,
Right.
but I know he respects his audience. I know
Yeah.
he doesn't demand that, like, only if you don't believe in Scientology, don't come and watch my movies. He's never said any
Yeah.
stupid ass
Anything
thing like
close to
that.
that, right? Nothing anywhere
Right.
near it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so it's like, if you need to appreciate me as a customer, you need to respect me. If you don't like me, keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And
Michael Jordan literally said Republicans buy sneakers too. You know what I'm
exactly.
saying? He was much more direct about it. You know, he was like,
right.
no, they, you know, so let's see. I don't care if they exhumed Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, their own damn selves. It's like yeah, it's just they have to do so much. I know some people have actually said, at least one person I saw say it, but I think maybe two people have said it. They have to move out of Washington State and move their headquarters back to the Midwest. All right. I'm not at that level. You know, I'm not saying that they literally have to move away from where they are. Now, some people will argue that they'll never get their the change in culture in Wizards of the Coast headquarters unless they make that kind of a move. That I kind of agree with. That I understand. You know, that no matter what, their pool of potential employees coming in are going to come in with that bent of an ideology that it's going to be hard to separate it, you know, from that. You know, but I don't even know if moving to the Midwest would carry, you know, carry people back over that line, and as long as things like we mentioned are still out there, you know, and you know, I don't even expect them to say we apologize for, you know, we apologize to so and so, or you know, we apologize to the fans or anything like that. Just come out and say, hey, you know, we made some really bad decisions, and we know that we turned off a segment of the, you know, a major segment, you know, the buying segment of our, you know, of our fandom, and we shouldn't have supported those messages then. We don't support them now. You won't see that kind of a thing going forward. You know, again, they don't have to call out any individual. They don't have to make a, you know, I'm telling you, Kevin, and you, Richard, we apologize to you or anything like that, you know, but they can make a statement that is, I know Professor Dungeon Master said that disclaimer they could have put out there is that not everything in these, you know, he was talking about the 50th anniversary and everything, you know, times have changed over the last 50 years, and not everything you see represented here might be what we believe in today, and leave it at that.
Right.
You know, and just stop there. That's it. No, this is bigoted, you know, prejudice, misogynist, sexist, you know, any of that stuff. Just say.
Or one line like, you know, when they used to play an R-rated movie on NBC or something, they'd say, you know, some of this might be offensive to some viewers or disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion advice. Just leave it at that. You know, and we're not going to say what it is. If anything, it might even make the game a little cooler. It's like, ooh, you know,
it's like,
and then they get their little something in print, but without the sanctimonious bull crap and
it's like, oh, we're better than you.
Yes.
You know, I'm an AD&D second edition kid. I spent nearly $1,500 the last few months on Castles and Crusades because I get it back into the hobby after 25 years. My current D&D seemed too lame for me. Yes, and you know, and sure, Troll Lord Games wants to put out good games. You know,
yeah, you mentioned their Kickstarter earlier. I ordered a couple books too. Now I am very much again AD&D, but they had a couple that I think were totally system agnostic, like the Thieves Guild and I think the Book of Names. Two of them, I think I got two. It's been a little while now.
Yeah,
I can't remember if I ordered one or two, but no, I'm waiting for mine as well. So they're a good company for sure.
Yeah, they have, you know, like I said, most of their stuff, like 99% of their stuff, I'm like, I don't mind buying a new printing of something, you know,
Mhm.
and I love their take on like the adventurer's backpack as an awesome thing. Now, some of the classes in there, I've been having this conversation on my thing. Some of the classes in there are very much like they were on Earth Arcana. It was kind of like a throwback. It's like, wow, this is such a one use kind of character class that as soon as you take it out of there, it doesn't work. So there's a lot of that in some of their extra
Mhm.
character classes, but they're all optional. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So they still have um that kind of throwback to AD&D times, especially
Sure.
first edition
Sure.
times. So you do see that parallel there too. But then that's part of the um, that was part of the flavor of AD&D. Was that sometimes you have these things that are just like kind of weird and outside of the you know I could see using that as an NPC, but not as a player character. It doesn't work.
Right.
And I was just talking to my players about that last night. I was like, you remember the Time Lord? How cool that class was, how overpowered it was, and that's why I never made it out of Dragon Magazine into Unearthed Arcana. But yeah, you don't have things like that you don't have things like that. I don't think in 5e, where people are like, oh, this is really cool. This
Mhm.
is like, I mean, I didn't play it all that much. I never read through, even while I had the books, I never read through them all like I had, with other editions. And I was just like, there was just nothing, there was no pizzazz to it. There was no soul to that
Absolutely.
game system at all. And that's something that when I see, other game systems, like Shadow Dark has a soul to it. You're playing Shadow Dark, and it feels different than anything else.
Mhm.
When you're playing Castles and Crusades, you really do feel like you're playing with a more streamlined version of AD&D first edition. You know, and when you're playing other game systems like DCC is completely DCC, right? It's like
Right.
you're playing that game system, and with all of its quirks and its crunchiness in some places, its wildness in others. It's like it's a game that it's memorable when you're experiencing it. To me, 5e, the six times or so that I played 5e, it was never memorable. There was nothing that I remember about any of those characters. The other thing was with it, I played six times with four different game masters and six different characters, because there was never anything that lasted more than a couple of sessions to begin with.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So it was like almost everything was a one shot with that game system. Nobody wanted to play, for a long term period of time. So anyway, I've been rambling for a while.
No,
What
you're
else?
spot on.
Yeah.
I played a little bit of 5e too, and I picked up from a recent stream you did with some of you guys are having a little fun with. I won't say his name, but you had mentioned that you had taken, I think, like 20 years off of role
Yes.
playing. I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And it was right for me. My stopping point was early 2000s, and I didn't get back again until 2019. So I skipped all of fourth edition, kind of a lot of fifth edition.
Wow.
And when I got the core books, I just kind of looked through them. Okay, and I again, there's a lot of stuff. I'm getting new. I'm rusty. I made a human fighter. The
Right.
end. And I went in and I was playing in these local games. I noticed though that there was nothing. The old TSR books, they were just as much fun to read as they were to play. And it didn't matter if it was a player's book, if it was a
Right.
DM's book, you could just like devour those. And
Yeah.
I noticed I didn't have that with 5e, but I kind of thought, oh, well, maybe that's just where, like, maybe that's me.
Right.
And I'm not as compelled to, but I tell you, after since 5e and the OGL and Kyle Brink and all that drove me back to
Right.
AD&D 100%, I started rebuilding my library. And I'll tell you, Richard, I was getting the core books, and I'm getting Birthright and Dragonlance. I would sit down and I would just sort of glance over a couple paragraphs, and an hour would go by, and I had read 2 chapters because it just sucked you in. I'm like, no, the old stuff really does just draw you in, and it inspires so much imagination and fun. And yeah, what are you going to read in the 5th edition Player's Handbook? It's like nothing. DM's Guide. I had never picked up any of the settings because they always had something aesthetically that just totally turned me off. Right. So I can't really speak to those, but no, I'm total same page.
I'm gonna answer this one here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to pull players back away from 5e after they feel like the superheroes and back to lower power games where I want to be. If you were a game master, recognize that you are you're the commodity that is scarce. All right. Not many people want to run games. All right. Whether it's 5e or many other role-playing games. So you're the commodity. So when you come to your table, you tell your players, hey, you know what? We're going to continue running this for the next couple of months, but, come September, we're moving on to this system. All right. You're welcome to continue playing. If not, I'll find another, people to fill in your seats. All right. You just tell them, I'm not playing this anymore. I'm moving on to something else. All right. They will come to your table. They will come back because they know there's very few people running games to begin with. So I tell my players now, and I listen to my players. My players will say, hey, can we try something? Can we do this or whatever? But usually I'm telling my players, all right, come September, we're shifting to this game system. All right. And maybe I'll be running this other game system. You let me know what other game system you want to, participate in. But for this one, this night, this is the game system I'm running. My players have been with me for, 4 years, a little over 4 years now. Some of them, they were with me for the whole AD&D 2 years and 3 months of weekly games that we just went, straight through nonstop, and then we switched to some other game systems. They've always followed me to another game system. When we didn't like the game system, it was like, hey, you know what? This is not, well, we're going to switch to something else, but usually we last about, a couple of months at least with every single game system. And we keep on reverting back to some of those older systems. Like, I had my longest one was AD&D first edition, my first, real game that I played, and to go back to it was, and I had someone, one of my players was a TSR employee from 82 to 86. All right.
Oh, really?
He worked on Oriental Adventures, with Zeb Cook, and so he was an adventure writer for tournament play when Oriental Adventures was being done as tournament play at Gen Con and other conventions and such.
Oh, very cool.
And so when he played in my game, after the first couple weeks, he was like, hey, I really have to tell you, it was the best compliment I've ever had. He was like, I really feel like for the first time in decades, I'm playing, Dungeons and Dragons, real Dungeons and Dragons again. And I was like, well, I'm just running AD&D. I was like, this is just AD&D. And he says, yeah, but it was just so refreshing to him to feel like he was back in the game system that he really enjoyed. And for him, that was Dungeons and Dragons, and for me, it's the same thing. It's like no other edition to me feels like Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe BECME does, but I'm saying like AD&D is it for me. When I play Castles and Crusades, I know I'm playing Castles and Crusades. You know what I'm saying? I'm running it, I should say. When I'm running it, I know I'm running it. and I love it for what it is and what it does. And, the fact that, it is to me the natural successor to AD&D first edition with portions of second and third edition mixed in a little bit. But to me, it's a much more it's a better streamlined system. It's like if AD&D had better layout, better, more concise rules and such, then that's what it would have been. And so, yeah, there's great systems out there that more than you can easily mention off the top of your head in many cases, and 5e isn't one of them. And it's a real shame that it's not. But 5e isn't one of those really standout systems. Sure, it sells tons. All right, maybe not recently, but 5e when it first came out, it is the, and I describe this, my analogy of it has always been the same. All right, it is the McDonald's hamburger. All right, sells a billion. Sells better than anybody else. All right, but if you had your choice between 3 different hamburgers, McDonald's hamburger will be the last one you'd choose.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? It's just it's the one that you'll find on every corner, in a city, but once you remove the accessibility of it, no one's choosing that burger, and that's what 5e is to me. It's just the McDonald's hamburger.
And it was always massively inflated by that perfect storm of Critical Role, Stranger Things, and the pandemic, and they're never going to have that wind at their backs again. So if the system doesn't deliver, which clearly 5.5e hasn't, then that becomes immediately apparent.
So I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Get some of these comments in here.
Yeah, go for it.
Then I made my return to the origins. Bought all AD&D second edition books, and then OSC Rules Cyclopedia, and now all the Orange Spines by Gygax. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean that's like I had to replace my entire collection. Everything. Everything that you see behind me, at one point when I had it, like everything disappeared in 2000, got married, had a yard sale, everything must go. What I'm saying? It was like
same thing. I kept 2 Orange Spine books. That's it.
And I don't recall I literally got rid of everything. That I had. And then, in 2015-ish or so, when I started getting back into the hobby, I was like, all right, I'm going to, buy some of these new things. And then I was like, I want my old stuff again. And fortunately at the time, I was averaging about $50 a book, on eBay, $50 a book, including Oriental Adventures, which then all of a sudden skyrocketed to above 100. I got the original Deities and Demigods for 120, and I thought I hit it out of the ballpark. I was like, oh my God, this thing was like so cheap. I was expecting it to always be over 200 or more,
right?
And I was like, all right, I got that one now, So, and then everything else was like, when you're paying $60 for an AD&D first edition book. Number one, it's going to hold up pretty well. It's already 40 years old, and they're usually still pretty darn sturdy in comparison. And if you're paying $60, that's modern day price of a hard.
That's the MSRP. Yeah.
It's like so you're going to pay the same money for a book that might fall apart in 4 years. You're pretty sure that a book is not going to go from 40 years to 45 years and all of a sudden fall apart in the 45th year. If it survived the 40, it's going to survive, quite much longer beyond that, as long as you're maintaining it. So, I never understood. Like now, sometimes they're out of, just
But
astronomical.
again, it depends on condition. If you're fine with just reader copies,
Oh
you
yeah,
can still get all the core, because you've got like the Sutherland and the Trampier versions.
yeah,
You've got the orange spine. They
yeah,
printed those bloody things so many years.
yeah.
If you're patient, you can really get them all, and even the deities and demigods if you want. But no, I'm with you, and I hear you on like what your friend was saying about it not really feeling like D&D,
Yeah.
because I realized I can't. I'm such a purist now. I can't even do all those retro clones. And I know there's some really beloved retro clones, and made by really good people. But I need to be holding a book that's got the Larry Elmore art in it, or the Trampier monsters, and so I just, it all is part of the feel for me.
Yeah.
And even what we can wing it without looking at the books, when I pick it up, I want it to be those originals. And so so if a modern retro clone that where somebody put their heart and soul in it doesn't cut it for me, oh yeah, 5e, forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm exactly in the same position as you are. I want to support Jay and Anne and or Anna and Luke, but the trust is lost. I'm just not. I can't see giving Wizards of the Coast money unless they do major steps forward. And that the easiest way to see that step forward has been taken is by that disclaimer coming down.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the easiest thing. Now I understand it'll take them a couple of days to do it.
Yeah,
It's a lot of documents they have to reload, re-upload and everything like that. But yeah, if that came down, then I'd be like, okay, now you've shown me actual, an action that I can witness, evidence of it. I don't want to hear I made some kind of a backdoor apology. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
right,
behind the scenes apology 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
Yeah, at a private dinner, Dan apologized for the disclaimer. So no. Take it down.
Yeah. Put it in writing and put it down there and be more specific. Yes. So yeah. Mine isn't like new, but it's still pretty darn sturdy. Me too. Osric won't do it. I need the orange spines.
Exactly.
The Osric is meant to be a reference anyway. It's not even meant to be.
Right.
But you're not going to be cracking open your orange spines every single time you're sitting at the game table. That's where Osric comes in. So you can preserve them for a little bit longer. I know a lot of times it's nice to have the books on the table as well, and you can show them off, or you can just like the run games with a physical book in your hand, even if you are online and you're using the PDFs opened up along your top row on your computer, and then you still have the physical books. That's how I run games anyway. I like
or if you're like me and you've got a couple mint ones, okay, buy one that's more worn out, and that's the one that you kind of flip through, in the middle of the session or what have you.
Yeah. Because I won't buy the PDFs. I just won't buy them.
No way.
Yeah.
Give some money, and with the scans they did, they're riddled with errors. Like dwarves have 8 hit dice now, I think, in the monster manual.
Really? I've never looked at them, so I wouldn't even know. I've seen people's images of them, and it's like, wow, that's kind of blurry. It's like it's not a great scan.
Right. Or no, dwarves, like they're supposed to have 1 hit dice, and when they scan it, the 1 turned into a 7. So now, like, if you didn't know any better, it's like, damn, dwarves are buff, and you just ran into 10 of them, and they don't like you or whatever. Storm giants, like something with their damage turned into number of attacks. It's like it's not everything, but for the errors that are there, they're massive. And I guess it's in all the book. There's like Dragon's Foot or something had a thread where people just posted all of them, and it's like, good Lord. Yeah.
While we're at it here, I am going to do some giveaways here. So let me go to I think I have to go to, oh, let me just go to the live stream here. And let's open this up. And now I can come down here. I'm going to give some memberships away. My last 5 of the, let's see, my last 5 of the month. All right. So there we go. Some free memberships out. They should start populating on here in a second. There they go. So let's see. So Mark the Shark, Rolly on Buddy. So it's Roll on Buddy. BGC, playing some games, and CFM Gomez. So congratulations to all of you. Check out the perks and everything that you get. Even if you got it for free, you still go onto my Discord and let me know that you're a member. And if I have openings in my games, you're welcome to, pop in. You're welcome to stay for a while. If you want to play for a couple of sessions, that's awesome too. I do have some openings in my games. So I have room in my Deadlands, my Thursday night games, alternating weekends, Deadlands. I have room for another player there. I have rooms for room for two more characters, an all dwarf campaign in my Saturday night game for OSE. So that's Old School Essentials. All dwarves. I have 4 players. We could probably use 6. That way, if somebody misses, we could still roll pretty good with just 5 players or whatnot. So so you get all of that from my Discord and see what games I'm running. I'm also looking to run some V&V Second Edition, Villains and Vigilantes Second Edition. That's going to be morning slot games. I'm semi-retired, so I don't work all week. I work 3 days a week and usually in the afternoons. So my mornings are wide open, and I can get quite a few gaming, slots in there if I wish to. So always looking to bring new people in to the gaming community of my Discord and get as many games in there as I possibly can. Until my wife yells at me, and it's like that's why they're morning games, because she's at work, so I can get away with it. For those morning sessions. But anyway, let's see. Eldritch Wizardry and Anarchist Cookbook were the forbidden books when I was a kiddo. I didn't have, even though I was a teenager and during the Satanic Panic, I had virtually no impact by the Satanic Panic on my gaming group. My gaming group, and this is kind of a shot at Kyle Brink, because he didn't think that we were diverse enough. But my first gaming table, my first dungeon master was from India. My second GM was a player at the same time, so he was Jewish. Another player was half Puerto Rican, half Italian. I'm a mod. I'm like, Italian, German, Irish, Ukrainian, mix. Once in a while, we had a player was Chinese. All right, so that was our core 5 players that were the first 10, 11 years of our gaming. So when they say, oh well, it wasn't diverse, I was like, our table was incredibly diverse.
There was zero discrimination in the 80s. It was like, if anybody wanted to play, it was like, okay, sweet.
We even asked girls to play. They didn't want to. It just wasn't the cool thing to do at the time. We were all the nerds or whatever, or kind of mixed, because that was the other thing. It was like, yes, it was cliquey, but some of us kind of fell in between, multiple cliques. I was like, a nerd and on a junior varsity, hockey team. So it was like, what niche did I fall into? I was kind of a cross between those, and I wasn't at the top of either of those two things. It was like, I wasn't the A student. I was like the A minus student. I wasn't the best hockey player. I was, good enough for junior varsity, but not good enough for varsity. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
absolutely.
But we had a very diverse group, just no girls because they didn't want to play, at least not in our, middle school and high school years.
Same. And there was no way I was going to ask.
So, we asked.
Not with that stigma.
We asked.
Yes, I played multiple sports too, and I kept those worlds separate. It just was not something that you advertised.
Yeah.
And if you saw somebody with a certain novel in their backpack, or talking about a computer game, then like, oh, okay, well, do you like also play such and such? That's how those conversations would go. You wouldn't just be like, you wouldn't lead with that.
Yeah, it's like what some people are saying here. It wasn't racist at all. It was just and here again. Wisconsin was full of white people in 1978. It wasn't the kids' fault, and it was very similar with us. Like I said, even though my gaming group was so diverse, my dungeon master was the only Indian in our school. Saying, the Chinese kid, David, his real name was Cam Fei.
Sure.
His family owned the Chinese restaurant in town. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, I'm sure there were other Jewish, students other than just, Adam, who was playing with us. But, the diversity was almost the full representation of our diversity was at our table. You know what I'm saying? It was like, and maybe we had one African-American kid in our school, at the time, maybe one or two. There just wasn't that. And this was Long Island, New York. This was not, this was not a place like the Midwest or something like that where, it was still New York. It just wasn't very diverse.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was in high school, so I'm a few years behind you. When I was in high school, it's from 88 to 92. And I was living in the Seattle area, a suburb of Seattle at the time, back when like Seattle was an awesome city. Mm-hmm. And there weren't a lot of black students at my school, but there were quite a few Asians. And in our little circle, there were we had two Chinese buddies, still friends with them to this day. And the funniest part of that, they both freaking loved Oriental Adventures.
Oh yeah,
one of them even had multiple copies of it, and it was even like, hey, when you want to play this, and it's so when the fact that was the book that started the disclaimers is just laughable to me. The people being offended on behalf of other people that love the game, regardless of their ethnicity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, like getting back on our topic here is, I hope that whatever they do produce isn't going to be twisted to, that kind of a thing with, sensitivity readers and all of that kind of nonsense. It's like, that's a hard no. That is a hard no. If I see, and like you said earlier, if Jason Tondro's name is anywhere in that book, I'm not freaking touching it. Or even the other ones that are in there. What's his name, Armand, or because he was what, the Radiant Citadel. That's.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Seriously, you're going to put him on? No.
Was that the one that he bragged that no white people contributed to this book? Yeah. Good gosh. No. That's what I'm talking about. TSR, can you imagine? You know what? No black people contributed to keep on the borderlands. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's like, no, with Pride, they said with Oriental Adventures, we had a bunch of Japanese playtesters,
with
Pride.
Right,
They were putting that out there, and not as like an excuse or saying, oh no, look, we have these plays. No, they were legitimate. They said, no, we play tested with them because we wanted their perspective on it. We wanted to make sure that we were giving it the proper respect, but still tying into, the Shaw karate movies kind of
Exactly. Yep. That was
feel
the
that they
mid
were looking
'80s.
for from it.
We were all ninja crazy. We had
Yes.
the little ninja magazines
Yeah.
where you could order shurikens in the
Yeah.
back, and with all the movies and everything. And those were exaggerated greatly, and even like you could almost say caricatures in some way. But they were done with love. It was done with reverence. Nobody was mocking anybody or putting anybody down. You take a first edition ninja and put it up against any other character class, it's going to destroy it. So no, there clearly was a lot of awe in those types of character types that was in no way demeaning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there was no ill intent at all in there,
No.
and you don't throw a disclaimer up when there is no ill intent. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Right.
that's a line that, I'm not going to cross that line. Corny, not racist. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it was meant to be corny too. I mean, in some cases it was, it was certainly not put out there as a historical representation of any one particular culture. It was a blending of. That's why it was called Oriental Adventures. It was not called Japanese adventures or Chinese or any of that. It was a mix of a bunch of different, mostly Japanese, yes, but there was a mix of a bunch of different cultural. Weaponry and other understandings, martial arts styles, and whatnot. So
And
they were
there
really
was no
going for
more
that movie
exaggerated than the
Yes.
European classes, than the barbarian,
Exactly. Yes.
or
Perfectly.
the druid. It was all
Mhm.
playing into the
Yes.
fairy tales and the folklore or movies and books.
Yeah.
Appendix
Yeah.
A,
They don't complain
all of that.
about. Yeah. No one complains about European stereotypes in
Right.
in fantasy. So it's like they'll always point to something like, I mean, all dwarves have a Scottish accent, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, that's a jab against Scottish people. It's like, no, said no Scottish person ever, right? No
Right.
Scottish person has ever complained about dwarves being represented as having a Scottish accent, so it's I don't know what they'll do before Gen Con. If they make some kind of a statement, an official statement in writing, and say and they take down that disclaimer, I would give it a certainly a look at it. But like you said, if there are certain names in that, in those credits, not doing it. Not giving them my money. Not with those individuals on there. And hopefully hopefully Dan Ayub hears some of this stuff and he actually
That's what I'm hoping to.
it. Hopefully, like you said, you actually put a tweet to him. Did he respond or no?
No. And
he
hasn't. I don't think he's posted anything since
10 days ago. It was like
late
10
last
days
year.
ago.
He's not really.
Okay.
He doesn't seem to engage too much, but
well, yeah, he probably doesn't want to. Number one, maybe he's been told not to. That's another thing. They're like, oh no, don't jump into the shark pool, and just stay clear of it. So that's a possibility too. But back in the 70s and 80s, we learned karate by watching Bruce Lee movies. Yeah, I mean, it was just, you know, and we typically didn't even, because we were kids, right? So we
Yeah.
didn't know the differences and the nuances between, whether it was, a karate movie is Japanese, Chinese, and the ninja movies were strictly Japanese, and you know
Right. Right.
um you know the only time they ever came together, they were always in opposition to each other, because like everything was the Boxer Rebellion. Everything was the their conflicts between the two and everything. I can't count the number of things when the Japanese came into a Chinese martial arts school and beat the crap out of everybody. I mean, that was virtually every Bruce Lee movie, right? It was like,
Right.
you know
Right.
yeah, there was no love between the Chinese and the Japanese in any of those movies. They were always in opposition to one another. So um, it's just we're at a cultural divide here within our hobby between old and modern. And I think the modern executives are starting to realize that we come with a lot of money, and there are plenty of political parallels that you can draw to it as well. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, so we have this whole thing with our governor back in 2022 told all the billionaires, get on the bus and go to Florida. All right. They're losing their freaking marbles now, being like, oh no, please come back, please come back. We need your tax money to pay for all of our very generous freebies that we're trying to give everybody. It was like, yeah, that's a good selling point, right? Oh yes, billionaire, I want you to come back so you can give me 50 million a year, or more, so we can give it to, as freebies to people that didn't, earn it. It's like, no, that's not a selling point. You're not going to bring them back. And Wizards of the Coast is not a selling point to bring us back, as long as you're still spitting in our face, with a disclaimer, with, no retraction of any of your prior comments or concerned. And those, very generic, we made some missteps. No.
Yeah. We
When it
alienated
is
some fans.
when it
Yeah.
is purposeful and it is, it's filled with vitriol, that's not a misstep. That's intentional, and that was an intentional harm being committed. That is not a misstep. All right. Against any other group, that would have been a fireable offense. I'm not calling for anybody
Oh,
to lose their
absolutely.
jobs, but there should be an admonishment of those statements. All right, publicly put out there, and use that same verbiage. Like I said earlier on, it was wrong then, it's wrong now, and it will be forever wrong in the future. We will not accept that kind of vitriolic talk coming from any of our executives or designers or whatever, directed at our customers. And that's all they have to say. With some of those other things, and then possibly I would look at it and
Yeah.
might at least pick up the PDF. Might not go the full $60 towards it, but might pick up the PDF if they made all of those steps. I don't see them doing that.
It blows. It's mind blowing how many offenses they've committed over the last few years.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I put a pretty extensive list in my post, and you mentioned some that I had forgotten. Even just having this discussion, I'm like, oh yeah, they omitted all half races because those are racist.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so,
I forgot about that too. Yeah.
There's half elves and half orcs and Greyhawk. So are they just going to instantly reverse that? There's my gosh, yeah. There's a long list.
One person had said that they have to stick to 5.5 rules, and so if they're sticking to 5.5 rules, that means that half orcs and half elves have to go. And to me, that's a
No,
deal breaker.
Same.
All right. Yep. Not that either of those two races were, really my go-to or anything like that. It's just the principle of the thing.
Yes.
It's like, then that is not Greyhawk. If you're going to put out a Greyhawk supplement, it needs to be Greyhawk. And Greyhawk doesn't have 5e races. It does have ones that have been removed from 5e. It doesn't have, it doesn't have drow that are, a huge segment of drow that are, good, and just the cultists of Lothar are the evil ones. No.
No.
They were hunting down, any drow that showed any signs of being good, or
they're not
even
good.
neutral.
They're not purple. They're not gray.
Yeah.
They're black, and they're bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're cool. Let them be.
Yeah. Isn't Melf a half elf? Yeah. Well, I know, I think it was RPG Pundit said, he'll come back as a, as a non-binary black woman in a, in a wheelchair. That would be Melf. It's like, but yeah, it's so yeah, if Melf is a half elf, what are they going to do? Isn't going to piss off some of their their sparkle trolls on Twitter, or on Blue Sky. I forget Twitter. They left Twitter. What will they say on Blue Sky if if Melf is a half elf? So. All right.
Again, maybe enough people that initiated all that are gone. I'm pretty sure it was Jeremy Crawford that was quoted as having a problem with the half races.
Yeah.
And he's gone. Perkins is gone. Brink is gone. I'm not saying destroy any person's livelihood, but if they wanted just take Tondro and give him some crayons and put him in the corner and let him do D&D cookbooks and give him the same salary, fine.
Yeah.
Just don't put his name in any books you want me to buy.
Melf is a pure elf. Okay.
I think he's a gray elf only because when they posted the art, he had gray skin and somebody said that. So I only know him from the Unearthed Arcana spells that are named after him. But
yeah, I don't know if he was ever stat blocked in anything prior to this. Yeah, possibly not. But there were plenty of half elves in Greyhawk.
Oh yeah.
That you'll see. So what are they gonna? They're gonna remove them all. So yeah. I was gonna say something. Grey elf, yeah. And I think gray elves were introduced in Unearthed Arcana?
I think so. I think
so. I think that's when they first. It might have been in Dragon Magazine first, and then because that was usually how they ended up in Unearthed Arcana. But I think
obviously Drow were from the modules, and then Fiend Folio, and then they became a playable race in Unearthed Arcana.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
but Grey Elves, I think that's where they. Were.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I could grab it off the shelf.
Right.
Yeah. I'll say, oh yeah, here they are. But I'm pretty sure they're almost everything in Unearthed Arcana was originally in a Dragon magazine. So it'll probably be there as well. All right. I'm going to leave it there. We'll wait and see, where this goes over the next couple of weeks or whatever.
Right.
And I'm sure we'll probably see quite a bit in because it is in August, right? Is Gen Con is August?
Yeah, supposedly they're supposed to announce the products for the entire next year, is what I heard they're going to do at Gen Con. Yeah. And then they just did a little bit of an advance on Melf, the Greyhawk guy, just because Luke and Gary Con, but everything else will be Gen Con.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kevin, thanks a lot for coming on. Everyone else, thanks a lot for coming in here. And thought they were introducing the Greyhawk Adventures book. Um, like a novel, or I know I saw the image for one, and that might be a novel, or maybe it's adventures. Like because I know they announced that they're going to go back to making the smaller adventure modules
Right.
and go back to that. Again, they're going to be 5e, so I have no use for them.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, I have no use for them whatsoever. But anyway, yeah, that would be a great thing if they started producing modules for AD&D First Edition. Own the
Right.
IP, for Christ's sakes.
Put the first edition in the Creative Commons. Let us make the modules for it.
Right.
And
or let Luke make the modules for him if you wanted to. And let him write it in. You own it. They are so petrified of the older editions outselling their current edition. They know they would outsell it, and that's why they won't do it. And they probably look at TSR having so many different game systems going at the same time, and it kind of watered down the brand, in that sense. But we didn't get that sense when we were playing back in the day. I mean,
no, you had Basic and AD&D together right to the very end.
Yeah,
of TSR anyway.
And I don't think that Star Frontiers pulled numbers away from AD&D, or neither did Marvel. TSR Marvel, or TSR Conan, or
Top Secret,
Gamma World, Top Secret. None of them pulled from. We played it all at the same time. I used to play 6 days a week, different games every week. AD&D might have been twice a week, and the other 4 days a week we were playing the other game systems. Just like, I didn't stop playing AD&D when we started playing Call of Cthulhu, or Villains and Vigilantes, or we crossed we went across different game companies and genres, and we played it all.
Absolutely.
Again, that's the other modern day mentality of, we just play 5e, and that's all my players want to play at that table. I was like, I've said it. I was like, you need better players. It's like, or just come to the table. This is what I'm running. You want to stay, you're welcome to stay. If you're going to walk, bye. And just impose, this is the game system I'm running. You want to run something different, you start running. And just be like hardcore, about it. You are the limited commodity. DMs are in scarcity, and for that reason, it's like, people. But you have to be willing to say no, which is another thing. We heard that plenty as Gen Xers, right? No.
Oh, yes.
It's like, and no meant no. So anyway. Ever play Car Wars? No, I haven't. I
owned Car Wars. I loved looking through the books, and the box art kicked ass. And I had the Auto Duel Apple II game, which was based on Car Wars, but that's the extent that I ever played it.
Yeah. I was looking at it recently. There's like the newest edition of it, right? It's out now. Or something like that.
I think it's a pretty elaborate.
But it looks totally different than the original or whatever. I didn't play it back in the day. What Greyhawk book would you indicate for an introduction to the setting? The box. I like the gold box. You have the the orange spine easily back from, back in the day. So that was James Ward wrote that. I think the box set is the one that I go to the most. Here to support Rich and do. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Agile, as always. I would love to support the people that are writing this thing and working on this thing. I just need to see a lot more movement on the part of Wizards of the Coast. Not just some, we made some missteps kind of
And
half-assed apology.
based on the posts on the threads on X, there's a whole lot of people that are saying the same. I'm definitely there to maybe the same degree myself. So
we're not in the minority of saying no, that's not enough.
So we're doing our part. Hey, if anyone's listening, a secondhand apology that was done in private, that was great. That is not enough.
Yeah, that's the first baby step. Maybe that's the first baby step. That's not anywhere near enough. So yeah, I'm still on the fence, leaning more towards I'm going to pass it on because I don't have any trust that they're going to take any additional steps forward. And like you said, I mean, I have to go back and watch it again and to see whether he's giving that sense of like relief, like, oh, I pulled this off. If I pick up that, because I wasn't really looking for that, but if he shows any kind of signs of like, hey, look, we really pulled this thing off, that's another indicator. I was like, nah, not involved, not interested. So anyway, the original of Car Wars was fun. Yeah, Steve Jackson was a great game system. They made great game systems back then. I was a big fan of Toon. Steve Jackson, not so much now, but back then, great stuff. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up. So thank you everyone for coming on in. Kevin, thanks a lot for coming on. I'm glad I saw you there on X, and I was like, hey, if you want to come on, I
appreciate you having me. That was fun.
It was open to anybody who was that wanted to argue, hey, you should really back this thing. And I know the only compelling thing I heard was that, well, if we don't back this and it undersells, then there's no chance that they'll move any additional steps forward, which may or may not be true. We'll see. We'll see what they do leading forward. Now that they hear all of this feedback and everything like that, because their survey, they got killed from everybody that said that their survey was devastating on them. And the disclaimer came up in the survey questions. People pointing out, take this thing down. So I'm glad that really backfired on them as well.
Yeah, I took the survey. I was much less diplomatic in the survey than I was on X or here. But again, that was before the Luke announcement and Dan Ayub. I was like, what is this, Jason Tondro gathering this info? F off,
Yeah. So. It's like, that's pretty awesome. So thanks, everyone. Again, thanks, Kevin. And you all have a great upcoming week. And I'll see you next week and next Sunday, 7:00. And we'll see what comes up during the week that will make that the focus of our discussion that night. All right. Take care, Kevin.